My sister sneered, "If we trim the dead weight from this family, you're the first to go." My parents chuckled. "Your only real value is the paycheck you provide." I exhaled slowly, looked her dead in the eye, and replied, "Perfect," then grabbed some cardboard boxes. "Because this property belongs to me." To understand how we reached this breaking point, you have to rewind 14 months to the morning my parents' artisan bakery finally went bankrupt. I am 32. I had spent a grueling decade climbing the corporate ladder as a senior data architect, and 2 years ago I finally closed on a stunning 4-bedroom craftsman home in the suburbs of Seattle. Original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, a fully finished basement suite. I paid the heavy mortgage entirely on my own. Then the bankruptcy happened. Dad claimed the market had simply changed. Mom cried hysterically about losing the house they had rented for 25 years. My older sister Brooke, who had bounced between 8 different college majors, suddenly had nowhere to go. They begged to use my basement, just until the dust settles. 9 months, absolute maximum. I agreed. That illusion shattered within 3 weeks. I came home from a 10-hour shift to find my pristine kitchen counters sticky with spilled matcha, and Brooke hosting a noisy manifestation workshop for 5 strangers in my living room. The financial drain was immediate. My water bill tripled because Brooke took hour-long showers twice a day. The grocery budget vanished because my parents refused to eat anything but premium organic brands. When I asked if they could contribute $200 a month for utilities, Mom acted like I had physically slapped her. Brooke rolled her eyes and claimed she was pre-revenue on a lifestyle vlog. By month 9, the deadline came and went. Nobody packed a single bag. When I brought it up over dinner, Dad crossed his arms. "The housing market is terrible. You have this massive place all to yourself. Why are you trying to throw your own blood onto the street?" The disrespect mutated into outright entitlement. I returned from a business trip to find my antique dining table sitting on the curb in the pouring rain. They had replaced it with cheap particle board because Brooke thought it fit her aesthetic for recording videos. 2 weeks later, my emergency credit card, kept in a lockbox in my home office, was missing. I found a pending balance of $3,400 for a Mac Pro and editing software. Brooke needed equipment, Mom explained dismissively. I swallowed the rage, canceled the card, and installed a deadbolt on my office door. I needed to focus on refinancing my mortgage to take advantage of a dip in interest rates. I sent the PDF application to the shared wireless printer. When I walked over to grab my papers, another document was sitting in the output tray. A dense, 70-page packet from a national lender, my name printed at the very top. I flipped to the 3rd page and my blood ran ice cold. A finalized, notarized approval for an $85,000 home equity line of credit. Attached was a digitally signed power of attorney, formally granting my father permission to borrow against my home. The signature was a flawless forgery of my handwriting. I marched into the living room and slammed the packet onto the glass coffee table. Dad barely glanced away from his tablet. "Brooke found an incredible deal on a custom Airstream trailer. We are just securing the funding. You secretly took out a second mortgage on my house. You forged my signature. We leveraged an idle asset," Mom corrected, taking a calm sip of herbal tea. "You have hundreds of thousands in equity just sitting there doing nothing. It is a family resource. You are always so terribly stingy with your success. It took me a decade of 80-hour work weeks to build that equity. You just committed a federal felony to buy a recreational vehicle." Brooke laughed from the couch. "God, you are always so insanely dramatic. Dad said we will pay the monthly minimums. You won't even notice the difference." "It is not a family loan," I said, my voice dropping to a dead mechanical pitch. "It is mortgage fraud. You stole $85,000 of my net worth." Dad stood up aggressively, his face flushing dark red. "Do not ever use that word in this house. We raised you. Family shares." I didn't shout back. I didn't cry. I just looked at the 3 of them. My father with his chest puffed out in false authority. My mother delicately adjusting the sleeves of a cashmere sweater I had bought her for Christmas. And my sister scrolling on the phone she bought with my credit card. The adrenaline in my system didn't make me want to scream. It made me incredibly, terrifyingly calm. I picked the 70-page packet up off the glass table. I turned around, walked down the hallway, unhooked my car keys from the wall, and walked out the front door. "Where are you going?" Mom called out. The front door clicked shut behind me. I got into my car and locked the doors. It was 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. The national lender listed on the paperwork had a physical branch about 20 minutes away in Bellevue. I drove in complete silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the sound of my tires on the damp Washington pavement and the methodical ticking of my turn signal. When I walked into the bank, I bypassed the teller line and went straight to the reception desk. I asked for the branch manager. I didn't sit down while I waited. 5 minutes later, a man in a crisp blue suit stepped out of a glass-walled office. His name tag read Jasper Farrow. "How can I help you today?" he asked, extending a hand. I bypassed the handshake and placed the packet on his desk. "Someone took out an $85,000 line of credit against my house. I didn't authorize it, I didn't sign it, and I want the funds frozen immediately." Jasper's customer service smile vanished. He closed his office door and gestured for me to sit. He booted up his terminal, asked for my driver's license, and spent 3 agonizing minutes clicking through screens. The silence in the office was suffocating. I could hear the faint hum of the air purifier in the corner. "The loan funded this morning," Jasper said softly. He turned his monitor slightly so I could see the screen. "The $85,000 was deposited into a joint checking account that was opened 2 days ago. Your name is on the account, alongside a male cosigner." "My father," I said, staring at the screen. "Freeze it." "I can freeze the account pending a fraud investigation," Jasper said, typing rapidly. "But I have to warn you, a wire transfer was initiated exactly 45 minutes ago for $62,000. It's pending in the Atch network. I can can attempt to recall it, but if it hits the receiving institution before the recall goes through, the money is gone. $62,000. The Airstream trailer. They hadn't even waited a full day. Recall it, I said. Whatever you have to do. To formally dispute the loan origination and clear the lien from your property title, we need a police report, Jasper explained, his tone strictly professional but tinged with genuine concern. You understand what that means? If we proceed with a fraud claim involving a forged power of attorney, this goes to federal investigators. The co-signer on this account will face criminal charges. He looked at me, waiting to see if the reality of sending my father to prison would make me back down. I thought about the particle board table. I thought about the stolen credit card. I thought about Dad telling me I was throwing my own blood onto the street. I'll have the police report to you by tomorrow morning, I said. Jasper nodded and hit the enter key. Account frozen. Wire recall initiated. I left the bank and drove straight to the local police precinct. Sitting in a drab, fluorescent-lit interview room, I filed a comprehensive report for identity theft and mortgage fraud. The intake officer was sympathetic, but blunt, because the fraud was committed by family members living in my home. The investigation would take time, and the civil eviction process was completely separate from the criminal fraud case. I had to formally evict them if I wanted them out. By the time I pulled back into my driveway, it was past 6 in the evening. The lights in the house were blazing. Before my key even turned in the lock, the front door jerked open. Dad was standing there, his phone gripped so tightly in his hand his knuckles were white. The red flush from earlier had deepened into a dangerous, mottled purple. What did you do? He demanded, blocking the doorway. I went to the bank, I said, pushing past him into the foyer. Mom and Brooke were standing in the kitchen. The atmosphere was thick, vibrating with panic. The dealership called, Dad yelled, following me down the hall. The wire bounced. The dealer said the account was flagged for fraudulent activity. Call them right now and clear the flag. We are supposed to pick up the trailer tomorrow morning. There is no trailer, I said, putting my keys in my purse and zipping it shut. I turned to face them. The account is frozen. The Helix is being investigated for fraud. And I just spent the last 2 hours at the precinct filing a police report for identity theft and forgery. Mom dropped her ceramic mug. It shattered against the hardwood floor, dark tea splashing across the baseboards. You called the police on your own father? She whispered, clutching her chest as if she couldn't breathe. Over money? Over $85,000 of stolen equity, I corrected. Yes, Brooke stepped forward, her phone already out, the screen glowing. I realized, with a sick twist in my stomach, that she was recording. You're actually insane, she said, angling the camera to capture my face. You're trying to send Dad to jail because you're a greedy, toxic narcissist who can't stand seeing us happy. You literally have millions of dollars. I have a mortgage, I interrupted, staring dead into the camera lens. And you have 30 days to vacate my property. I'm having formal eviction notices served tomorrow morning. Dad let out a sharp, bitter laugh. He pocketed his phone and crossed his arms, suddenly looking far too relaxed for a man who had just been reported for a felony. You think you're so smart, he sneered. You think you can just snap your fingers and throw us out like trash. He walked over to the kitchen island, pulled open a drawer, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the granite counter. It slid across the polished surface and stopped inches from my hand. We've been talking to a lawyer since last month, Dad said, a smug, satisfied smirk spreading across his face. Just in case you tried to pull something like this. You see, when the bakery went under, we didn't just lose our business. We lost the capital we intended to use for our retirement. Capital we spent putting you through college. I stared at the envelope. I had a full academic scholarship. You never paid a dime for my tuition. We provided housing, food, and emotional support that enabled your success. Mom chimed in, her voice instantly recovering its strength. We are investors in your career. The lawyer's name is Arlo Beckett, Dad said, tapping the envelope. He filed a civil claim this afternoon. We aren't tenants. We are claiming a constructive trust over this property. We invested sweat equity. Brooke painted the guest room. I fixed the gutters in November. By law, we have an ownership stake in this house. I opened the envelope. It was a formal notice of a pending lawsuit, demanding a 40% equity share of the property based on uncompensated labor and familial investment. It was absolute garbage. A frivolous, legally baseless claim designed to do exactly one thing: cloud the title of my home and legally block me from evicting them until the civil suit was resolved. A process that could take a year. You can't kick owners out of their own house, Brooke sang out, ending her recording. And until the lawsuit is settled, Dad added, leaning over the counter. That police report you filed is just a domestic dispute over a shared asset. The bank won't touch it. The cops won't touch it. You're stuck with us. I looked down at the legal paperwork in my hands. The letters blurred slightly under the harsh kitchen lights. They hadn't just stolen my credit card. They hadn't just forged my signature. They had quietly, methodically built a legal cage around me inside my own home. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an email notification from Jasper Farrow at the bank. The subject line read, urgent, regarding your wire recall. I opened the email. I am so sorry, Jasper wrote. The recall was too late. The ACT transfer cleared the receiving bank 5 minutes before our freeze took effect. The $62,000 has been successfully deposited into the dealership's account. Because your father is a co-signer, the dealership considers the funds legally cleared. I locked my phone screen. The kitchen was dead quiet. Dad was still leaning over the counter, the smug, satisfied smirk practically carved into his face. He was watching my eyes, waiting for the devastation to hit. He wanted the tears. He wanted the screaming. He wanted me to fall apart so he could feel like the big man in the room, the patriarch who had finally put his ungrateful daughter in her place. I folded the lawsuit back into the manila envelope. Have a good night, I said. I walked down the hall, went into my bedroom, and locked the door behind me. I heard Mom scoff loudly in the kitchen, followed by Brooke's high-pitched laugh, but I blocked it out. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my laptop. First thing, find the dealership. There were only 3 major RV dealers within a 50-mile radius of Bellevue that sold custom Airstreams. I checked the joint checking account on my banking app. The wire transfer details listed a corporate entity, Pacific Northwest Recreational. I found their website. I dialed the sales department. It was 6:40 p.m. They closed at 7. A man answered. Pacific Northwest RV. This is Stellan. Stellan, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. My name is on the checking account that just wired you $62,000. The co-signer is my father. He is scheduled to pick up a custom Airstream tomorrow morning. Oh, right. The rush order. I'm actually looking at the file right now. Everything cleared on our end about 10 minutes ago. Listen to me very carefully, I said. That wire transfer was funded by a fraudulent home equity line of credit. My father forged a power of attorney to borrow against my house. I spent the afternoon with the Bellevue police. The report number is 44819B. The bank's fraud department has already frozen the originating account. If you let him drive that trailer off your lot tomorrow, you are accepting stolen funds, and I will name your dealership as a recipient in the federal fraud investigation. The line went dead quiet. I could hear a keyboard clacking in the background. Ma'am, Stellan said, his upbeat sales voice completely gone. Are you serious? Call the Bellevue precinct, I said. Verify the report number. Ask for the intake desk. If that trailer leaves your property, you will be holding the bag for $62,000 of stolen money. Okay. Let me get my general manager. We're putting a hard hold on the release. Nobody is taking that unit anywhere until this is cleared up. I hung up. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, just a little. The adrenaline finally fraying my nerves, but I couldn't stop. Dad thought a frivolous civil suit was a checkmate. He thought Arlo Beckett was a shield. I needed my own sword. I spent the next 2 hours researching real estate litigation attorneys. I didn't want a family lawyer. I didn't want a mediator. I wanted someone who specialized in aggressive property disputes and title defense. I found a firm in downtown Seattle, a partner named Hester Wynn. Her bio mentioned a ruthless track record in dismissing fraudulent liens and constructive trust claims. I filled out her online intake form, attached a PDF of Arlo Beckett's letter, and paid the $500 emergency consultation fee with my debit card. I barely slept. I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of my family moving around the house I bought, the house I paid for. Brooke was playing music in the basement. Mom was running the dishwasher. They were celebrating. At 8 p.m. the next morning, my phone rang. It was Hester Wynn. I read the letter, she said, skipping any kind of greeting. Her voice was sharp, fast, all business. It's garbage. Sweat equity doesn't apply to painting a guest room or cleaning gutters in Washington state. A constructive trust requires a documented financial contribution to the purchase price or mortgage. Did they ever pay your mortgage? Never. I have bank statements proving I made every payment from my personal account. Good. Arlo Beckett is a bottom feeder. He files these nuisance claims hoping the homeowner will settle just to clear the title so they can sell. But you aren't selling. I'm evicting them, I said. Exactly. The civil suit does not stop an eviction. It just makes the optics messy. But the forged tele? That's your golden ticket. The bank allowed a massive line of credit to open based on a fake power of attorney. The bank is terrified right now. They broke federal Know Your Customer regulations. We are going to weaponize the bank's legal department against your father. How? I'm sending a letter of representation to the bank's fraud division today, Hester said. I'm going to inform them that if they do not immediately clear the lien from your title and pursue criminal charges against the co-signer to recover their lost funds, we will sue the bank for negligence and regulatory violations. We make it cheaper for them to destroy your father than to fight us. Do it, I said. I'm also emailing you a formal 30-day notice to quit. Print it out, hand it to them, tape it to their bedroom doors, take a time-stamped photo of the notice on the doors. If they aren't out in 30 days, we file the unlawful detainer. I printed the notices in my office. I walked out into the hallway. The house was empty. Dad's car was gone from the driveway. They had gone to get the Airstream. I taped the notices to the basement door and the guest room door. I took the photos. Then I made a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen island, and waited. They were gone for exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes. When the front door opened, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dad walked in first. His face wasn't red this time. It was pale, a sickly, furious white. Mom was trailing behind him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Brooke walked in last, staring at her phone with a heavy, dramatic scowl. Dad stopped in the foyer. He looked at me sitting at the island with my coffee. You called the dealership, he said. His voice was dangerously quiet. I did. They treated me like a criminal in the middle of the showroom. The manager came out and told me the funds were frozen under suspicion of wire fraud, in front of a dozen customers. You committed wire fraud, I pointed out, taking a sip of my coffee. Being treated like a criminal seems like the natural consequence. He lunged forward, closing the distance between the foyer and the kitchen in 3 massive strides. He slammed both hands down onto the granite counter, leaning over it, his face inches from mine. I didn't flinch. I didn't lean back. I am going to ruin you, he hissed. Arlo is amending the lawsuit today. We are going for 60% of the house. We are claiming elder abuse. We are going to drag this out for years, and you will drown in legal fees before you ever get us out of this house. You should check your bedroom doors, I said evenly. Your 30-day eviction clock started at 9:30 this morning. Dad scoffed, a wet, ugly sound. A piece of paper means nothing. The courts are backed up for 8 months. Maybe, I said. But my lawyer, Hester Wynn, just contacted the bank. She reminded them that they approved an $85,000 loan using a forged signature. The bank realizes they screwed up. They are initiating their own federal fraud investigation to cover their liability. You aren't just fighting me anymore. You're fighting a national lender's legal department. Mom let out a sharp gasp. Brooke, record Record her. She's threatening us. I don't need to record her. Brooke snapped, pocketing her phone. She looked at me, her usual smugness entirely replaced by panic. They kept the money. The dealership. They said the wire cleared, but the asset is locked. The bank froze the joint account. I can't even buy groceries. Dad spun around to glare at her. Shut up, Brooke. No. Brooke yelled, her voice cracking. My vlog equipment is tied to that account. My subscriptions are going to bounce. You said this was foolproof. You said she wouldn't notice the equity draw for months. The kitchen fell dead silent. Dad stared at Brooke, sheer murder in his eyes. Mom pressed the tissue over her mouth. I smiled. A small, cold, terrible smile. So that was the plan, I said. Just bleed the equity slowly. Pay the minimums. Hope I didn't look too closely at my own title. Dad straightened up. He adjusted his collar, trying to regain the patriarchal authority that had just evaporated into the air. We are a family. We were managing family assets. You're squatters, I said, and you have 29 days left. I took my coffee mug, stood up, and walked past them to my office. I locked the deadbolt. For the next 3 days, the house turned into a psychological war zone. They stopped pretending to be civilized. The entitlement stripped away, leaving only pure, venomous spite. They left rotting food on the kitchen counters. They turned the thermostat up to 85 degrees right before I left for work. Brooke parked her car diagonally across the driveway, so I had to park on the street in the rain. I documented everything. Every mess. Every petty act of vandalism. I sent the photos to Hester. But on Thursday afternoon, while I was sitting at my desk reviewing a data pipeline architecture, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown Seattle number. Hello? Is this the primary homeowner? A man asked. His voice was deep, slightly weary. Speaking. My name is Bowen Trask. I'm a detective with the Bellevue Police Department Financial Crimes Division. I was assigned to the report you filed regarding the fraudulent HELOC. Yes, Detective Trask. Thank you for calling. Has the bank provided the forged power of attorney documents? They have, he said. He paused, and I heard the rustle of paper. But I'm looking at something else right now. Your father came into the precinct this morning. He brought a printed stack of text messages. My stomach tightened. Text messages? Between you and him, Trask said slowly. Dated 3 weeks ago. In these messages, you explicitly give him permission to draw against your home equity to purchase the Airstream, as long as he handled the paperwork. You also complain about being too busy at work to go to a notary, and you tell him to just sign it for me so we don't lose the deal. I stopped breathing for a second. The absolute audacity of it. That's a lie, I said, my voice rising in pitch. I never sent those texts. He spoofed them. There are apps that let you create fake text threads. I'm aware of spoofing apps, Trask said, his tone perfectly neutral. But he also brought in your mother and sister. They both gave sworn statements that they were in the room when you gave verbal authorization for the loan. I pressed the heel of my hand against my forehead. They were doubling down. They were perjuring themselves to muddy the waters, to turn a clear-cut fraud case into a messy he-said-she-said family dispute. Detective, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. If I authorized the loan, why did I freeze the funds? Why did I stop the trailer purchase? Why did I hire a lawyer to evict them? Your father claims you got angry because he bought the wrong model of Airstream. He says you wanted the classic silver bullet design, and he bought the fiberglass model. He says this is a retaliatory filing. He is lying. Listen, Trask sighed. I deal with a lot of family financial disputes. When multiple witnesses corroborate a story, and there's digital evidence, even if it might be fabricated, it makes it incredibly difficult for the local prosecutor to file felony charges. We have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you didn't authorize this. Right now it looks like a civil dispute that got out of hand. So, you're dropping the case? I asked, the ice creeping back into my veins. I'm suspending the criminal investigation pending a subpoena of your cellular provider's raw data logs to verify if those texts were actually sent from your device. That process takes about 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks. That was all Dad needed. It was a delay tactic to keep the criminal pressure off while Arlo Beckett pushed the civil suit. Thank you, Detective, I said, and hung up. I stared at my monitors. The lines of code blurred together. They were smarter than I gave them credit for. Or rather, Arlo Beckett was smarter than I gave him credit for. He was coaching them. My phone buzzed again. A text from Hester Wynn. Bank's legal counsel just reached out. They are nervous but claim they hold a valid lien. They want to schedule a mediation call for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Don't speak to your family. See you on the call. I typed a single word in reply. Confirmed. Then I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to my data pipelines. I didn't leave my office for the rest of the evening. Around 8 o'clock, I heard Dad pacing the hallway outside my door. He was on the phone, his voice deliberately loud so I could hear every word through the drywall. Yeah, Arlo. The cops practically laughed her out of the precinct. Dad boomed, his tone thick with manufactured confidence. Trask saw right through it. She's trying to back out of a family agreement because she got cheap at the last minute. Absolutely, we're proceeding with the civil suit. She's trapped, and she knows it. I kept typing. I didn't engage. When I finally went to bed, I wedged a heavy wooden desk chair under my bedroom doorknob. Not because I thought my father would physically attack me. His brand of violence was entirely financial and psychological, but because I didn't want Brooke sneaking in while I slept to steal my laptop, my passport, or any other documents I hadn't moved to the safe deposit box yet. Friday morning was a masterclass in psychological warfare. I walked into the kitchen at 7 to make coffee. The sink was overflowing with crusty dishes. A carton of milk had been left open on the counter, pooling slightly on the granite. Mom was sitting at the island, meticulously painting her nails a pale shade of pink. She didn't look up when I walked in. Arlo says we can include our legal fees in the final settlement, she said to the air. Since you're the one forcing us into court with these frivolous eviction threats, you're going to end up paying for our lawyer to take half your house. It's almost poetic. I stepped around the spilled milk, poured my coffee and walked back to my office without saying a single word. I heard her huff in frustration as the deadbolt clicked into place. They wanted a screaming match. They wanted me to lose my temper so Brooke could record it and play the victim. Silence was the only weapon they couldn't counter. At 1:55 p.m., I clicked the Zoom link Hester had sent me. My camera flicked on. A moment later, Hester's square appeared. She was sitting in a stark, glass-walled office overlooking the Seattle skyline, wearing a tailored navy blazer. She looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Microphone check, Hester said, her voice crisp. I'm here, I said. Good, let me do the talking. The bank's lead counsel is Emerson Slade. He's going to try to bully you because they are holding a $62,000 bag and they want you to carry it. Do not apologize. Do not explain your family dynamic. Do not offer any context. Just sit there and look unimpressed. Understood. At exactly 2 p.m., 2 more squares popped into the grid. One was Jasper Farrow, the branch manager I had spoken to on Tuesday. He looked exhausted, his tie slightly loosened. The other square held a man in his late 50s with expensive silver hair and a gray suit. Good afternoon, the silver-haired man said. I am Emerson Slade, senior litigation counsel for the lender. I have Jasper Farrow here for factual reference regarding the branch-level transaction. Hester Wynn, representing the homeowner, Hester said. She didn't offer pleasantries. Emerson, I'll save us the billable hours. Your branch originated an $85,000 HELOC using a forged power of attorney. You failed to perform adequate KYC verification, and you dispersed funds to a newly created joint account. I want the lien released from my client's title by close of business today. Emerson smiled. It was a practiced, condescending smile. Miss Wynn, I appreciate your aggressive posture, but our internal review paints a different picture. We have spoken to Detective Trask at the Bellevue Police Department. He informed us that your client's father provided digital correspondence, text messages, proving your client authorized the loan. The police have suspended the fraud investigation. And, Hester asked, leaning closer to her webcam. And, Emerson continued, that means this is a domestic dispute, not bank fraud. Your client authorized a family member to handle the paperwork. The fact that she now regrets the specific vehicle purchased does not invalidate our lien. We hold a legally binding claim against the property. Jasper, Hester said suddenly, shifting her gaze to the branch manager's square. When the father brought the power of attorney into your branch, did you verify the notary stamp? Jasper blinked, clearly caught off guard by being addressed directly. The document was processed through our automated underwriting portal. The system scans for a valid stamp and signature block. Right, the automated system, Hester said, her voice dripping with venom. Emerson, did you look at the notary stamp on the POA, the actual ink? Emerson frowned, shuffling a stack of papers out of frame. We have a copy of the recorded document. Yes, read the name of the notary, Hester commanded. Coralie Vance, Emerson read. Did you run Coralie Vance through the Washington State Department of Licensing database? Hester asked. Silence hung over the Zoom call. Emerson stopped shuffling papers. I did, Hester said, holding up a printed sheet of paper to her camera. Coralie Vance's notary commission expired 3 years ago. She is no longer a licensed notary public in the state of Washington. Furthermore, I pulled her LinkedIn profile this morning. Coralie Vance currently works as a social media manager at a digital marketing agency in Capitol Hill, the exact same agency where my client's sister Brooke held an internship last summer. My heart hammered against my ribs. Brooke had gone to an old coworker who still had her physical stamp from years ago and convinced her to stamp the forged document, probably promising her it was just a family formality. Your automated system, Hester continued, locking eyes with Emerson's camera, rubber-stamped an expired, invalid notary seal, which means the power of attorney is void on its face, which means the deed of trust you recorded against my client's home is a fraudulent instrument. Emerson's face was completely unreadable, but Jasper looked like he was going to throw up. You have 2 choices, Emerson, Hester said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. Option A, you release the lien by 5 p.m. today. Option B, I file a formal complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Washington State Department of Financial Institutions on Monday morning, outlining exactly how your bank bypasses federal KYC laws with faulty software. I will also sue the bank for statutory damages and slander of title, and I will subpoena Coralie Vance, which will immediately trigger a federal investigation into your origination practices. Emerson stared at the screen for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. He looked at Jasper, then back to Hester. We will release the lien on the property, Emerson said quietly. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. However, Emerson added, his tone hardening. The $62,000 was successfully wired to the dealership. The bank is now out that capital. If the power of attorney is void, then the individuals who presented it committed bank fraud. We will be transferring the debt entirely to the co-signer, your client's father, as an unsecured personal liability. That is between you and him, Hester said dismissively. We will also be freezing every account associated with his social security number across our entire network, permanently, and referring him to our internal criminal recovery unit, Emerson said, looking directly at my square. I hope you understand, ma'am, that your father is about to face the full legal weight of a national financial institution. He stole from me, I said, my voice steady. Do what you have to do. We'll expect the release confirmation by 5, Hester said, and ended the call. I sat in my quiet office. The hum of my computer tower was the only sound. I had won. The house was safe. The $85,000 of stolen equity was wiped off my title. But Emerson's words echoed in the small room. The full legal weight of a national financial institution. My phone vibrated. A text from Hester. Leon is dead. Now we wait for the bomb to drop on their end. Keep your door locked. I stood up and stretched my legs. It was 2:45 p.m. I unlocked my office door and walked out into the hallway to get a glass of water. The house was eerily silent. I walked into the kitchen. Dad was standing by the sink. He was staring at his phone screen. He wasn't red, and he wasn't his usual angry mottled purple. He was a terrifying chalky gray. Mom was sitting at the dining table, the cheap particle board one Brooke had bought, clutching a stack of mail. Brooke was on the couch, her laptop open in front of her. Dad? Brooke asked, her voice tight. My debit card just declined for my web hosting. I tried to log into the app, and it says my login is suspended. Dad didn't answer. His thumb swiped frantically across his phone screen, over and over again. Arthur, Mom said, her voice wavering as she looked at him. What's wrong? Arlo just emailed. He said he got a notice that the bank is withdrawing their claim on the house. She looked up at me, a triumphant, vicious spark in her eye. See? The bank realized they messed up. Arlo scared them off. Dad finally looked up from his phone. He looked at Mom. Then he looked at me. There was no triumph in his face, just the dawning, absolute horror of a man who realized the ground had just opened up beneath his feet. They didn't withdraw the claim, Dad whispered, his voice cracking. They transferred it. What does that mean? Brooke asked, standing up from the couch. My retirement account, Dad said, staring at the blank screen of his phone. The joint checking. The savings account. Everything is zeroed out. It says administrative hold fraud recovery. They locked everything. That's illegal. Mom shrieked, jumping up from the table. They can't just take our money. Call Arlo. Arlo handles civil real estate claims. Dad roared, the sudden volume making Mom flinch backward. He slammed his phone down on the counter so hard the screen spiderwebbed with cracks. This is the bank. They took it. All of it. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto me. The air in the kitchen felt heavy, suffocating. You did this, he said, taking a step toward me. You set us up. I protected my property, I said, standing my ground. You used an expired notary stamp from Brooke's old coworker, Coralie Vance. The bank realized you committed felony fraud, and they decided to come after you instead of me. You set yourselves up. Brooke gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. You looked up Coralie? My lawyer did, I said. And now, the bank's lawyers are looking her up too. She was just trying to help us out. Brooke screamed, her face twisting in panic. Her commission just lapsed. She said it didn't matter for family stuff. You're going to get her arrested. No, Brooke, I said coldly. You are. Dad was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. The realization that his clever legal shield had just become a cage of his own making was fully setting in. The $62,000 they owed the bank wasn't tied to my house anymore. It was tied to him. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the panic in the room like a knife. We all froze. Nobody moved toward the foyer. The doorbell rang a second time. Then, a heavy rhythmic knocking on the solid wood of the front door. Bellevue Police. A deep voice called out from the porch. Open the door, please. I walked past my frozen family, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the front door open. Detective Trask was standing on the porch. He wasn't wearing a uniform, just a rumpled brown suit jacket over a blue shirt, his badge clipped to his belt. A uniformed officer stood 2 steps behind him, looking terribly bored as he chewed a piece of gum. Come in, I said. Trask stepped into the foyer, wiping his shoes on the mat. He took in the pristine original hardwood, the high ceilings, and then the absolute graveyard of tension radiating from the kitchen. He walked forward slowly, stopping just at the edge of the room. Arthur, Trask said, his voice entirely stripped of the weary, bureaucratic patience it had on the phone just hours earlier. We need to have another conversation. Dad didn't move. He didn't puff out his chest. He just kept staring at the cracked screen of his phone sitting on the granite island. Trask pulled a small, spiral-bound notepad from his inside pocket. About 20 minutes ago, I received a phone call from the legal department at a national lender. They informed me that the power of attorney used to secure an $85,000 line of credit on this property was executed using an expired, invalid notary seal. A seal belonging to a woman named Coralie Vance. From the living room couch, Brooke let out a small, strangled whimper. They also informed me, Trask continued, his eyes locking on to Dad, that they have officially voided the lien on your daughter's house, transferred the resulting $62,000 unsecured debt entirely to you, frozen your banking assets, and are preparing to file a federal complaint for bank fraud. Which brings me back to the printed text messages you handed me this morning. Trask stepped closer to the island. You told me your daughter explicitly authorized this loan, but if the notary stamp was faked, the entire legal document was faked, which makes me very curious about the digital evidence you submitted to my precinct. I need you to hand over your phone, Arthur, right now. We are going to extract the raw data for those texts. Trask looked down. He saw the phone sitting on the counter. The glass was shattered, the display flickering uselessly beneath a massive spiderweb of cracks. Trask let out a slow, heavy sigh. Did you just smash the device containing the digital evidence you submitted to a police investigation? I dropped it, Dad said. His voice was hollow. It didn't sound like him at all. My hand slipped. That is incredibly unfortunate for you, Trask said, signaling to the uniformed officer. The officer stepped forward, pulled a clear plastic evidence bag from his cargo pocket, and used a gloved hand to slide the broken phone inside. Mom finally found her voice. She stood up from the particle board table, the color rushing back into her face. You can't just take his property. We have a lawyer, Arlo Beckett. Your civil attorney has nothing to do with this, ma'am, Trask said without looking at her. He turned his head toward the living room. Are you Brooke? Brooke shrank back into the couch cushions, pulling her knees up to her chest. Yes. Do you know a Coralie Vance? Brooke burst into tears. It wasn't her usual manipulative, pretty crying designed to get out of chores or extract money. It was an ugly, snot-nosed, hyperventilating panic. It was Dad's idea. She shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the kitchen island. He told me to call her. He said he just needed a quick stamp because my sister was traveling for work and they didn't want to lose the interest rate. I didn't know it was expired. I didn't know he was stealing. Brooke, Mom gasped, looking at her youngest daughter as if she had just grown a second head. Do not speak to them without Arlo. Arlo is a real estate lawyer, Mom. Brooke screamed back, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceilings. Dad just committed federal fraud, and he made me an accessory. Coralie is going to kill me. Trask wrote something down on his notepad. He didn't look angry. He just looked like a man who had seen this exact flavor of suburban self-destruction 100 times before. He clicked his pen shut and looked at Dad. Arthur, you are going to come down to the precinct with us right now, Trask said. We are going to sit in an interview room, and you are going to explain exactly how that notary stamp got onto that document, and exactly what application you used to spoof those text messages. If you cooperate, I will note it for the prosecutor. If you don't, I will arrest you right here in your daughter's kitchen for obstruction of justice and destruction of evidence. Dad looked at Mom, then he looked at me. There was no anger left in his eyes, just a pathetic, desperate plea for a bailout. He wanted me to call it off. He wanted me to say it was all a big misunderstanding, that I would pay the bank, that I would fix it. I just picked up my empty coffee mug and placed it in the dishwasher. Let's go, Trask said. Dad didn't argue. He didn't grab his coat. He just turned and walked out the front door, his shoulders slumped, the uniformed officer walking closely right behind him. Trask lingered for a second, looking at me. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then followed them out, pulling the front door shut behind him. The house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Mom sank slowly back into her chair. She stared blankly at the empty space on the granite counter where Dad's phone had been. Brooke was still crying on the couch, her face buried in her hands. I'm calling Arlo, Mom whispered, her hands shaking as she pulled her own phone from her pocket. Arlo will fix this. He's aggressive. He said we had a bulletproof case for the house. She dialed the number on speakerphone. It rang 3 times before a receptionist answered. Mom demanded to be transferred to Arlo Beckett. A minute later, the lawyer's slick, confident voice came through the tiny speaker. Miriam, Arlo said, I was just about to call you. I received a very concerning email from the bank's litigation department about 20 minutes ago. Arlo, the police were just here. Mom rushed out, her voice pitching up in panic. They took Arthur to the station. The bank froze our accounts. You need to go down there and represent him. We need to sue the bank for locking our money. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Miriam, Arlo said, his tone entirely devoid of the aggressive warmth he had surely used when they hired him. My firm represents clients in civil property disputes. We do not handle criminal defense, and we certainly do not handle federal bank fraud. Furthermore, I was just informed that the basis of our constructive trust claim, the supposed familial investment into the property, was funded by a line of credit secured by a forged instrument. But the sweat equity, Mom pleaded. Arthur fixed the gutters. Miriam, listen to me closely, Arlo said, his voice dropping into a harsh, professional chill. By presenting a forged document to a financial institution, Arthur has exposed himself, and potentially you, to severe criminal liability. The bank's lawyers have made it abundantly clear that they will pursue anyone associated with this transaction. I cannot represent you in a civil matter that is actively tied to a criminal fraud investigation. It is an ethical violation. You can't just abandon us. Mom yelled at the phone. We paid you a $3,000 retainer, which has been exhausted by the initial filing and today's correspondence, Arlo replied smoothly. Any further representation would require a new retainer of $10,000, which, given that your accounts are frozen, I assume you cannot provide. I am formally withdrawing as your counsel. I will email the withdrawal notice to you this afternoon. Do not contact this office again. The line clicked and went dead. Mom sat perfectly still. The phone slid out of her hand and clattered onto the cheap particle board table. I looked at the clock on the stove. It was 3:45 p.m. I had a data modeling meeting in 15 minutes. Just a reminder, I said, my voice completely calm, cutting through the heavy silence of the kitchen. The 30-day eviction notice is still active. Day 1 is almost over. I turned and walked back to my office. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. I sat down at my desk, woke up my monitors, and clicked the link to join my afternoon meeting. I spent the next hour discussing cloud migration architecture, my voice steady, my mind perfectly clear. When I finally emerged at 6 o'clock to make dinner, the reality of their situation had fully settled over the house. Brooke was standing in the kitchen, pulling open cabinets. Mom, there's nothing in here but dry pasta and canned beans. Where are the organic chicken breasts? Where is the kombucha? I couldn't go to Whole Foods. Mom snapped from the living room. She was sitting in the dark, the television off. My debit card declined at the gas station. I only had enough cash in my purse to buy half a tank of gas. I couldn't even buy groceries. Well, I'm starving, Brooke whined. Order a pizza or something. With what money, Brooke? Mom screamed, finally losing her carefully maintained composure. The bank took it. They took the retirement. They took the savings. I have $42 in my purse, and that is all the money we have in the world. I walked past them, opened the refrigerator, and pulled out the ingredients for a salad. I washed the lettuce in the sink. They both watched me. I could feel their eyes burning into my back. Are you going to feed us? Mom asked. Her voice wasn't demanding anymore. It was tight, strained, laced with a bitter, humiliating defeat. I bought these groceries with my paycheck, I said, chopping a cucumber. The paycheck you said was my only real value to this family. You wouldn't let your own mother starve, she said, clutching the arms of the chair. You have $42, I replied, tossing the vegetables into a bowl. There's a Safeway a mile down the road. They sell rice. I ate my dinner in my office. At 8 o'clock, the front door opened. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. It was Dad. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. He shuffled into the house, his coat wrinkled, looking completely exhausted. The police had let him go, at least for now, but he didn't look like a man who had won anything. I heard the muffled sounds of an argument breaking out in the living room. Mom's frantic, high-pitched questioning. Dad's low, hollow, defeated grumbles. Brooke crying again, demanding to know what Coralie was going to do. They didn't come near my door. The weekend passed in a tense, claustrophobic stalemate. They were trapped. They couldn't afford to move out, and they couldn't afford to stay. Brooke tried to film a vlog on Saturday afternoon, putting on a brave face in the backyard, but she gave up after 10 minutes when her ring light died, and she remembered she couldn't afford to replace the batteries. On Monday morning, I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee when a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. A young man in a polo shirt got out holding a thick manila envelope. He walked up the steps, asked if I was the homeowner, and handed me the envelope. "Process server," he said brightly, and walked back to his car. I opened the envelope. It was from the bank's legal department, but it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Arthur. I walked inside and dropped it on the kitchen island. Dad was sitting there, drinking tap water out of a plastic cup. He stared at the envelope like it was a live grenade. "It's for you," I said. He reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the paperwork out. He read the first page. His face went slack. "They filed the civil suit for the $62,000, he whispered, "plus damages, plus legal fees. They're demanding over $100,000. You should probably call Arlo," I said, pouring my coffee down the sink. Oh, wait, Dad didn't even have the energy to look angry. He just let the papers slip from his fingers. They scattered across the granite island, heavy white sheets covered in dense legal jargon, detailing exactly how the rest of his financial life was going to end. Mom walked into the kitchen, drawn by the sudden silence. She looked at the papers spread across the counter, then at Dad's face. She didn't ask what it was. I think she already knew. "Arthur," she whispered. He didn't answer her. He looked at me. It was the look of a man who had finally hit the absolute bottom of the hole he'd spent the last week digging. "Where are we supposed to go?" he asked. His voice was completely flat. "We have no money. Our accounts are locked. I don't know how to fix this." It was the first time in 32 years I had ever heard my father admit he didn't know what to do. A month ago, a week ago, even a few days ago, it might have broken my heart. I might have stepped in. I might have offered to pay for a motel, or hire them a defense attorney, or let them stay in the basement a little longer while they figured it out. But I looked at him, and all I saw was the man who had forged my name. The man who had sneered at me and told me I was throwing my own blood onto the street. The man who had happily plotted to steal my equity to buy a luxury trailer, completely indifferent to how it might destroy my future. "I don't know, Dad," I said, "but you can't stay here." I rinsed my mug, placed it on the drying rack, and walked out of the kitchen. They didn't wait the full 30 days. I think the sheer weight of the bank's lawsuit broke whatever fight they had left. The delusion evaporated. There were no more threats of elder abuse claims, no more whispered conversations in the living room about taking 60% of my property. They finally understood that every day they stayed was just another day closer to the sheriff physically dragging them out of the house. Brooke left 2 days later. I watched from the living room window as she dragged 4 oversized suitcases down the driveway. She had spent the entire morning crying on the phone to an ex-boyfriend she had dumped a year ago for not being ambitious enough. He pulled up in a beat-up Honda Civic. She didn't look back at the house when she got in. She just slammed the door, and they drove away. Mom and Dad took another week. Without access to their bank accounts, Dad had to drive his SUV to a local used car lot and sell it for a fraction of its value in cash, just to afford a deposit on a weekly motel room out in Kent. On a dreary Tuesday morning, I took the day off work. I stood on the wraparound porch with my arms crossed against the morning chill, watching as my parents loaded the last of their things into a rented cargo van. Mom carried out a box of kitchen supplies. Dad carried a stack of folded clothes. They moved slowly, heavily. They looked like strangers. Dad paused by the bottom step of the porch. He looked up at me. He opened his mouth, and for a second, I thought he was going to apologize. I thought he might finally say the words, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done it." Instead, he just shook his head, a tight, bitter motion. "You're going to be very lonely in this big house," he said. "I'll manage," I said. He got into the driver's seat. Mom was already sitting in the passenger side, staring straight ahead at the dashboard. The van engine turned over with a rough cough, and they pulled slowly out of the driveway, merging onto the wet street. I stood on the porch until they turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Then I turned around and walked back inside. The house was a mess. There were scuff marks on the walls, stains on the basement carpet, and the kitchen smelled faintly of rotting garbage they hadn't bothered to take out. It would take me a week of deep cleaning just to get it back to baseline. I needed to call a locksmith to change the deadbolts, and I needed to call Hester Wynn to confirm the unlawful detainer wouldn't be necessary. But as I stood in the foyer, listening, the only sound was the faint ticking of the hallway clock. No thumping bass from the basement, no shrill arguments from the living room, no passive-aggressive comments echoing off the high ceilings, just silence. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a trash bag, and started throwing away the spoiled food they'd left behind on the counters. It was dirty work, but I didn't mind. For the first time in 14 months, I could finally breathe. I tied the bag shut, wiped down the granite island, and looked out the window at the suburban street. The property belonged to me, and nobody was ever going to take it away again.